I shamelessly called him out for being soft in bed. During our group dinner, but they sided with him. Hello, Reddit. I don't even know how to start this, but I think I just ruined my life in the worst possible way. The kind of way that you don't come back from. The kind of way that keeps you awake at night, staring at the ceiling, knowing that you have no one to blame but yourself. I know what you're thinking. What could I have done that was so bad? I wish I had a simple answer. I wish I could say that it was one bad decision, a mistake made in the heat of the moment, but that would be a lie. The truth? I destroyed my marriage with my own hands, not in a single night, but slowly, over time, like I was chiseling away at it, piece by piece, without even realizing I was breaking the very foundation beneath me. And I think it all started in my bedroom. My name is Lauren, and I'm 29 years old. I've been married to Ethan for 5 years, and for most of that time, I thought I was happy. I really did. We had everything, or at least it looked like we did. A beautiful home, financial stability, a circle of friends who adored us, and a husband who, by all accounts, should have been perfect. Ethan is kind. He's reliable. He's the kind of man that women dream about settling down with, stable, thoughtful, always putting me first. He makes breakfast every morning, remembers my favorite kind of wine without asking, and never forgets an anniversary or birthday. If I ever needed him, I knew he'd drop everything to be there. That's the kind of man he is, but the kind of man he is in everyday life is not the kind of man he is in bed. I don't know when I started resenting him for it. Maybe it was gradual. Maybe I ignored it for too long, convincing myself that everything else made up for it. I told myself it didn't matter, that sex wasn't everything in a marriage. But the truth is, it mattered. It mattered so much that, after a while, it became all I could think about. Ethan was always so careful with me, so soft, so gentle, and at first I thought it was sweet. When we first started dating, I told myself that it was a sign of how much he cared. He never rushed things, never pushed, always let me set the pace. But then we got married and things never changed. Every night felt the same. Routine, predictable, mechanical. I knew exactly how it would start, exactly how long it would last, and exactly how it would end, too soon, leaving me unsatisfied, lying awake next to him, frustrated and irritated, wondering if this was all I would ever have. At first, I tried. I really did. I told myself that passion was something we could work on, that it wasn't just about physical satisfaction. I even tried to talk to him about it once, hinting at what I wanted, at what I needed. But Ethan just laughed, brushing it off like it was nothing, like he didn't even notice the problem. He told me he thought our sex life was fine, that I was beautiful, and that he was happy with how things were. I told myself I could live with that. I lied. The worst part? He didn't know. He should have known. He should have noticed the way I stopped initiating, the way I started making excuses, the way I barely reacted when he touched me. But he didn't. Or maybe he did, and he just didn't care enough to do anything about it. I started dreading it. Dreading sex with my own husband, not because I didn't want to be intimate, but because I didn't want that. I didn't want the same robotic, passionless routine every night, knowing exactly when it would end, knowing that it wouldn't satisfy me, but that he would fall asleep perfectly content. I felt trapped, like I was suffocating in my own marriage. And then he came along. His name is Chris. That's when everything changed. I didn't mean for it to happen. I never woke up one day and decided I wanted to ruin my life. But looking back, I don't know if I ever really stopped myself from going down that path either. And now I wish I could go back. I wish I could undo it. But I can't. And the worst part? I don't even know if I regret the affair itself. I only regret getting caught. You see, Chris, I don't even know how to describe him in a way that does justice to what he is, or what he became. Chris has been Ethan's best friend since childhood, but if you didn't know that, you'd never believe they came from the same world. Where Ethan was calm and careful, Chris was reckless and cocky. Where Ethan was soft and sweet, Chris was teasing and rough around the edges. He had the kind of presence that pulled people in, the kind of confidence that made women laugh too loud at his jokes, and men either admire him or feel threatened by him. And the worst part? I wasn't immune to it. I never really paid attention to him before. I mean, he was Ethan's friend, not mine. He was always around, of course, holidays, barbecues, random weekend get-togethers. But he was just there, a background character in my life, loud, charismatic. A little bit of a show-off. I had dismissed him as one of those guys who never really settled down, who loved attention and lived for it, and yet somehow, over time, he became the only thing I could think about. It started small. At least that's what I told myself. Innocent, harmless, just a little flirting. The kind that no one would notice, the kind that meant nothing. I would say something sarcastic, and Chris would smirk at me like we had a secret. He would brush past me at a party, his hand barely touching the small of my back, lingering just a little too long. When I spoke, his eyes stayed on me, sharp, unreadable, like he was listening to something more than my words. I liked it. It was different. He was different. He made me feel like I was something more than just Ethan's wife, something more than just the woman who went through the motions every day, pretending she wasn't bored out of her mind. I should have stopped it then. I should have recognized it for what it was, a slippery slope, a dangerous game. But I didn't, because for the first time in years, I felt alive. It was little things at first, the way he would tease me when Ethan wasn't paying attention, the way he would watch me with this look that felt too intense, too knowing. And I let it happen. No, I encouraged it. I started dressing differently when I knew he'd be around. Tighter clothes, shorter skirts, a little more makeup, just enough that it was still subtle, still something I could pretend was for myself. But it wasn't for me. It was for him. The first time I knew it had crossed the line was the night Ethan and I had people over. It was supposed to be a casual night, dinner, drinks, the usual. But at some point, I caught Chris watching me, and when I met his gaze, I didn't look away. I held it. I let it linger. I let him see that I wasn't just playing along anymore. And I swear, I saw it then, that shift in his expression, the unspoken acknowledgement of what we both knew was coming. I spent the entire night hyper-aware of him, of every time he moved, every time his eyes found me, every time his voice dipped just a little lower when he spoke to me. I could feel the pull between us, this thing that had grown so big it was impossible to ignore. And then Ethan left for a work trip. I didn't plan for it to happen that night. I really didn't. I had already made up my mind that it was just a game, a harmless game. But when Chris texted me that evening, casual, nonchalant, asking if I wanted to grab a drink, I didn't even hesitate. I don't even know how to explain what happened next. Or how quickly it happened. I met him at a bar. That was supposed to be it, just drinks. Just something to take the edge off, to push the boundaries, but not actually cross them. But one drink turned into two, and two turned into something else entirely. And by the time I realized where this was going, I was already in his car. I don't even know how we got there. 1 second we were sitting across from each other, talking like we always did, and the next, his hands were on me. I should have stopped him. I should have said something, but I couldn't. Because the second Chris touched me, I forgot everything else. It wasn't soft. It wasn't careful. It wasn't anything like what I had with Ethan. It was raw. It was urgent. Chris didn't ask before he kissed me. He didn't wait for permission. He didn't hold back. And I let him. I let him press me up against the leather seats of his car. I let his hands roam over me, rough and demanding, pulling me closer like he'd been waiting for this moment forever. I let him whisper things against my skin that made my entire body burn. And when we finally made it back to his place, when he had me on his bed, it ruined me. Everything I thought I knew about sex, about pleasure, about desire, was a lie. Ethan had never made me feel like that. Not once. Not in all the years we had been together. Chris was everything Ethan wasn't. He lasted. He took control. He didn't just touch me, he owned me. And the worst part? I loved it. I didn't feel guilty, not even a little bit. Not then. Not when I was gasping for breath, lying tangled in his sheets, my body still shaking. Not when he pulled me back for more, like he hadn't had enough. And definitely not when I finally went home, knowing I could never sleep with my husband again. Ethan could never compare. Not after this. I don't think I even tried to hide it. Not really. Not after that first night. Something inside me had shifted. Something I couldn't take back. Something I didn't want to take back. Ethan and I had always been comfortable, predictable, easy. Chris and I were dangerous. I had never felt so alive. At first, I told myself it was just a phase, that it was just a secret indulgence, something to make me feel like a woman again instead of just a wife. But it didn't stop. I didn't want it to stop. I started thinking about Chris all the time. He was in my head, under my skin, crawling into every part of my life. And Ethan? Ethan became the obstacle in my way. I avoided him like it was second nature. It wasn't even hard. I had already spent years pretending I was satisfied, pretending our marriage was perfect, pretending I wasn't lying in bed every night feeling unfulfilled and unseen. Now, at least, I had a reason to avoid him. I started working late, not because I needed to, but because it gave me the perfect excuse to see Chris. I would text Ethan that I had a long day, that I was exhausted, that I just wanted to shower and go straight to sleep. And he believed me. Of course he did. Ethan wasn't the kind of man who assumed the worst. He trusted me. I should have felt bad for that. I didn't. Instead, I used it. I started making excuses every time Ethan initiated sex. I told him I was stressed. I told him I was cramping. I told him I just wasn't in the mood. Then he stopped asking after a while. And when he did touch me, even if it was just an innocent brush of his fingers along my arm, I hated it. It made my skin crawl. Ethan was too soft, too gentle, too familiar. I had spent so long craving something new, something exciting, that now he disgusted me. The very idea of having sex with him again felt wrong. How could I ever go back to that after having Chris? Chris, who could make my legs shake just by looking at me a certain way. Chris, who owned me every time we were together. Chris, who knew exactly how to touch me, exactly how to pull sounds from my lips that Ethan had never even heard before. I needed him. And the more I had him, the more reckless we became. It started with his apartment. At first, that had been our safe place, our little escape, away from everyone else, away from the life I was supposed to be living. I would tell Ethan I was going out with friends, that I had dinner, that I needed a girls' night. And then I would find myself wrapped up in Chris's sheets, trembling under him, unable to stop coming back for more. But soon, that wasn't enough. I wanted more. So we started sneaking around in places we had no business being. Once, at a friend's housewarming party, we had disappeared into the bathroom while Ethan was laughing with the guys downstairs. I still remember how Chris had locked the door behind us, how he had pushed me up against the cold tile of the wall, how he had made me bite my own hand to keep from making a sound. I don't know if I had ever been more turned on in my life. And then there was Ethan's car. That had been Chris's idea. I had thought it was too risky, but maybe that was the appeal. I still remember the way my heart pounded as I slid into the back seat. The same back seat Ethan had driven me home in countless times. The same back seat where I had once napped on long road trips with my husband. Chris had leaned in, his lips ghosting over my ear, telling me how much he loved knowing I was his now, not Ethan's. And I let him ruin me in my own husband's car. I should have been scared. I should have known that we were pushing the limits of what we could get away with. But I didn't care. I was so high on him that nothing else mattered. Not my marriage, not my reputation, not the fact that I was breaking the heart of a man who had never done anything but love me. All that mattered was Chris. I was completely addicted. It should have been a normal night. Just another dinner with friends, the kind we had every few months, nothing out of the ordinary. We had done this 100 times before. The same people, the same easy, familiar conversations, the same laughter over inside jokes that had been running for years. But this time was different. This time, I was buzzed, my head warm from the wine, my limbs loose, my thoughts just unfiltered enough to let things slip. And I felt good. Chris was sitting across from me, eyes flicking to mine every so often, that familiar smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. It was thrilling in a way that shouldn't have been. A silent reminder of what we had done just the night before. Ethan was next to me, completely oblivious, as always. I didn't know it at the time, but I was about to ruin everything. It started as a joke, just some harmless teasing about relationships, about marriage, about bedroom dynamics. Someone had made an offhand comment, something about how the honeymoon phase dies out, how after a while you have to work to keep things exciting. There was laughter, casual agreement. Someone said that some couples still managed to keep the passion alive, but it took effort. And then, before I could stop myself, I opened my mouth. I was feeling bold, invincible. Maybe it was the wine. Maybe it was the way Chris had been looking at me all night, his eyes reminding me of everything we had done behind Ethan's back. Maybe it was the sheer thrill of knowing something no one else at that table knew. So I laughed. I actually laughed before I said it. I shrugged, leaned back in my chair, and said it so casually, like it was nothing. Like it wasn't the cruelest thing I could have possibly said. At least some of you have partners who can actually last longer than 5 minutes in bed. The words hung in the air. I don't know why I said it. Maybe some part of me wanted to hurt Ethan, to punish him for being everything he wasn't. Maybe some twisted, arrogant part of me wanted people to know, to acknowledge that I was getting what I needed elsewhere because Ethan couldn't give it to me. But the second the words left my mouth, I knew. I felt the shift at the table before I even looked up. The laughter died instantly. The easy conversation came to a screeching halt. No one spoke. No one even moved. And then I looked at Ethan. He was frozen. Completely still, his face draining of color so fast that for a second I thought he might actually be sick. His hands, which had been resting on the table, slowly curled into fists. And then my gaze flickered to Chris. He had tensed, his usual cocky smirk nowhere to be found. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't even looking at me anymore. He just shifted in his seat, staring down at the table like he wanted to disappear. And that was when I realized exactly what I had done. The silence stretched. It was suffocating. And then Julia spoke. I hadn't even thought about her being there until that moment, but suddenly she was right there, front and center, disgust radiating off of her in waves. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't yell. She just stared at me with something worse than anger. Disappointment. Lauren, that's disgusting. How could you say that? I felt my stomach drop. And then everyone else started shifting uncomfortably. I could feel the weight of their judgment settling around me, the realization that no one, not a single person, found it funny. I tried to play it off. I tried to laugh, to brush it aside like it was just a joke, but no one was laughing with me. Because they all knew. Maybe they didn't know the full story, but they knew enough. I had humiliated my husband in front of his closest friends, that I had taken something intimate, something that should have stayed between us, and turned it into a punchline. And then Ethan moved. He didn't look at me when he pushed back his chair, the sound scraping against the floor making me flinch. He didn't say anything, didn't demand an explanation. He just stood, adjusting his jacket like he hadn't just been humiliated in front of everyone he trusted. And then he did the worst thing he could have possibly done. He thanked everyone for the dinner, like nothing had happened, like I hadn't just ripped him apart in front of our entire social circle. Then, without another word, he walked out, and no one stopped him. I felt the blood drain from my face as I watched him leave, something cold and terrifying settling in my gut, because for the first time since this entire affair started, I realized something I had never even considered before. Ethan wasn't going to forget this. Ethan wasn't going to forgive this, and I had just signed my own death sentence. I should have gone after him. That's what a good wife would have done. That's what any normal person in a healthy marriage would have done. Gotten up, followed him out, apologized, begged, anything. But I didn't. I just sat there, staring at the door Ethan had walked out of, feeling nothing but a strange electric rush coursing through my veins. It was exhilarating. Not the way everyone had looked at me like I was the worst person alive. That part made my stomach churn. Not the way Julia had shaken her head at me, her face full of disappointment and barely concealed rage. Not even the awkward, suffocating silence that had settled over the table after Ethan left, like everyone was waiting for me to show some kind of remorse. No, the part that thrilled me, the part that sent a twisted surge of powerful, intoxicating heat through my body, was the fact that Ethan had done nothing. He had walked away. Don't confront me. Not yelled. Not even asked for an explanation. He had left like I wasn't worth fighting for. And I don't know why, but that pissed me off. I wanted a reaction. I wanted him to do something to prove that he still cared, that he wouldn't just sit there and let himself be humiliated without consequence. I had just publicly destroyed him, and yet he had simply thanked everyone for dinner and left. I felt unstoppable, like I had finally broken free. For so long, I had felt trapped in my marriage, trapped in a relationship where passion had died, where desire had fizzled out, where I had to pretend that Ethan was enough. But tonight, I said it out loud, for everyone to hear. And that meant there was no turning back. So I didn't. I finished my wine, ignoring the weight of everyone's judgment pressing down on me. I barely listened when someone awkwardly changed the topic, trying to salvage the dinner that I had single-handedly ruined. I wasn't interested in damage control. I was interested in one thing. Chris. He hadn't said a word since I made my little comment, but he had watched me. I had felt his gaze burning into my skin, his body tense, his jaw locked. And when my phone buzzed under the table, I already knew who it was. I didn't even hesitate. I left before dessert, offering a half-hearted excuse about being tired, ignoring the way Julia scoffed under her breath. Chris had left before me. I didn't care. Because while Ethan was probably sitting at home, staring at the walls, wondering where it had all gone wrong, I was already on my way to the only man who could actually satisfy me. The second I walked into Chris's apartment, I knew. He was waiting for me. Leaning against the kitchen counter, arms crossed over his chest, watching me like he already knew exactly why I was there. And maybe that was what made it so much hotter. I felt wild, drunk on my own recklessness. My body was still buzzing from what had happened at dinner, from the way I had exposed Ethan's weakness in front of everyone, from the fact that my husband was probably breaking down at home while I was here, standing in front of a man who had already ruined me for him. I didn't even give Chris a chance to speak. I grabbed him, pulled him to me, crashed my lips against his like I was starving. And maybe I was. Maybe I'd been hungry for this all along. The way he responded, rough, impatient, owning me the way he always did, made my head spin. I felt his hands on me, gripping, claiming, pulling me against him like he had been waiting for this moment just as desperately as I had. And then we were moving, stumbling into his bedroom, tearing at each other's clothes, gasping, desperate. He didn't ask why what had happened at dinner happened. He didn't care. All he cared about was the way my body melted under his hands. I lost myself completely. Every single second of that night was more intense than anything I had ever felt before. It wasn't just about the way he touched me. It was about everything. The danger, the thrill, the knowledge that Ethan was at home, broken, clueless, mourning a marriage that was already dead. And I didn't care. I let Chris wreck me over and over, dragging me into pleasure so consuming, so overwhelming that I couldn't even think straight. It was everything Ethan never was, everything I had craved for years. And as I laid there after, my body still trembling, my mind hazy from pleasure, I felt no guilt, none at all, because as far as I was concerned, this was the life I was meant to live. Ethan had never been man enough to claim me. Chris was. And I never wanted to go back. I woke up feeling satisfied. My body ached in the best possible way, my limbs tangled in sheets that weren't mine, my skin still thrumming with the aftershocks of everything Chris had done to me the night before. For a moment, I just laid there, stretching lazily, a small smile curling at the edges of my lips. I felt untouchable. And then I grabbed my phone. The moment I saw the screen, my entire body went cold. Missed calls, dozens of them, from Ethan, from Julia, from my mother, from numbers I didn't even recognize, and then the messages. I couldn't breathe as I scrolled through them. Ethan knew. He knew everything. Somehow, while I had been here, wrapped up in Chris, completely lost in my own arrogance, my husband had been burning my life to the ground. I shot up in bed, the sheets pooling around my waist, my heart hammering against my ribs. Chris stirred beside me, but I barely noticed. Because as I read the messages, I realized something even worse than the fact that Ethan knew. He wasn't just leaving me. He was destroying me. By the time I got home, Ethan was gone. Not just out for a drive, not just cooling off, gone. His clothes, gone. His work laptop, his car keys, his personal belongings, all of it, gone. And he hadn't just left. He had erased himself from my life entirely. The bank account we shared, emptied of his portion, his contact information, blocked me. Our wedding pictures, deleted from his social media like we had never even existed. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what he had done before he left. I don't know how he did it. I don't even know when he found out. But Ethan wasn't the weak, pitiful man I had convinced myself he was. He was calculating, methodical. And in one single night, he made sure I lost everything. I called my mother first. I don't know why. Maybe I thought that if anyone would take my side, it would be her. But the second she answered, I knew. Her voice was flat, cold. She didn't yell. She didn't ask me what had happened. She didn't even cry. She just told me that Ethan had called, that he had told her and my father everything, that I had betrayed him, lied to him, humiliated him, that I had thrown away my marriage for a cheap thrill with his best friend. She told me I was an embarrassment, that she couldn't believe she had raised someone so heartless, so cruel, and then she told me not to call again. I don't know how long I sat there, the phone still pressed to my ear, even after she had hung up, even after I had been disowned. I tried calling Julia next. She didn't answer. No one did. I don't know why I even expected them to. Why would they? They had been there. They had heard what I said. They had seen the way I humiliated Ethan, the way I laughed about it. Maybe I could have salvaged it if that had been all they knew, but Ethan had told them everything. The affair, the lies, the way I had been sneaking around with Chris right under his nose. I tried texting. I tried begging. But the only response I got was from one friend, someone I had known for years, someone who had been at my wedding, someone who had once told me she thought Ethan and I were perfect together. She said I made her sick. I blocked her before she could block me first. I thought, for a brief delusional moment, that maybe I could at least bury myself in work, that if I could just focus on something else, if I could pretend my life wasn't crumbling around me, maybe I could figure out a way to fix it. But when I got to the office, people were staring, whispering, and when I sat at my desk, my boss was already waiting for me. I don't even remember what she said, not really. Something about ethics, about reputation, about how personal issues should never bleed into the workplace. But it didn't matter. Because in the end, she said the one thing that sealed my fate. We have too many valuable clients who know about this, Lauren. We can't keep you here. Ethan. Of course. Because he had connections. He had made sure that even the place where I had built a career wouldn't want me anymore. And just like that, I was jobless. I told myself that at least I still had him. That even if the entire world had turned against me, Chris would still be there. He had to be. But when I called, he didn't pick up. When I went to his apartment, he wasn't there. And when I finally tracked him down, when I finally found him standing outside of his office, looking pale and furious and completely lost, I knew. Ethan had gotten to him too. Chris's boss had called him that morning, told him there had been a complaint, told him that there was too much baggage tied to his name now, that his reputation had been tainted, and then they fired him. Because of me. Because of what we had done. Chris barely even looked at me. When I tried to talk, he just shook his head, and then he walked away. He didn't say anything, because there was nothing left to say. By the time the reality of it all sank in, I was sitting in my empty house, surrounded by the remnants of a life that no longer existed. Ethan was gone. My family was gone. My friends were gone. My job was gone. Chris was gone. And I had done this to myself. I had thought I was untouchable. I had thought I could have it all. But Ethan was never weak. I had underestimated him. And in the end, he had made sure that I lost everything. Update. Hello, Reddits. It's been a week now since my whole life crumbled. And Ethan wasn't just gone. He had erased me. I don't know why I expected anything different. Maybe some part of me thought he would want closure, that he would need to see me, to scream at me, demand answers, ask me why I did it. But he didn't. There were no fights, no late-night phone calls, no desperate attempts to make me feel the weight of what I had done. He simply vanished. It was like I had never existed in his life at all. The divorce papers arrived at my door 3 days after he left. 3. Not weeks. Days. There was no hesitation, no second guessing. I barely even looked at the papers when I saw them in my mailbox, my fingers trembling as I pulled the thick envelope out. My name was written in bold, impersonal letters across the front, and I knew without opening it what it was. My hands shook as I ripped the seal, as I pulled out the legal confirmation that I was no longer Ethan's wife. No explanations, no personal note. Just a clean, simple termination of everything we had built together. I should have expected it. I should have seen it coming. But the reality of it didn't sink in until I reached the last page where his signature sat, bold and final. And then at the bottom of the paperwork, there was a single line of text, not from the lawyer, not something legal, something from him. The last thing Ethan ever said to me, "You never deserved me." That was it. That was the last thing my husband, the man who had loved me more than anything, the man who had built a life with me, the man I had destroyed, chose to say to me. Not an "I hate you," not a "Why did you do this?" Not even a goodbye, just a statement. Simple, unforgiving. And he was right. I didn't deserve him. I didn't deserve anything. And the worst part? I didn't even get to beg. Because by the time the divorce was finalized, he was already gone. He had left the city, moved, disappeared like I had never been part of his life. No forwarding address, no social media updates, no way to find him. Ethan had walked out of my life without ever looking back, and somehow that hurt more than anything else. Update. Hello, Reddits. This is probably my last post here. It's been a month. A month since the whole thing happened. A month. That's all it took. A month for Ethan to move on. A month for him to find someone else. A month for him to be happy again. I hadn't seen him since he left. I didn't even know where he was. He was a ghost, someone I used to know, someone I had torn apart with my own selfishness. And then one night I saw the photo. I hadn't even meant to. I wasn't stalking his friends. I wasn't trying to find a glimpse of the life he had rebuilt without me, but somehow the picture still found me. It was Julia's page. I don't know why I clicked on it. I don't even know what I was looking for. Maybe some desperate part of me just wanted to see someone, anyone who still had some connection to Ethan. And then there it was. A picture of him, smiling. His arm was around Julia. They were sitting together at a table, drinks in front of them, laughing, leaning into each other in a way that was too natural, too intimate, like they had been doing this for a while, like I had never even been in the picture, like I had never even mattered. I stared at the photo for what felt like hours. My chest was tight, my breath short, my entire body frozen in place. He looked different, not sad, not broken, not like someone whose life had been torn apart by the woman he loved. He looked relieved. And suddenly I knew. Ethan was better off without me. And he knew it. That realization settled over me like a crushing weight, like something I should have understood a long time ago. Because while he had moved on, I was still here, still alone, still stuck in the ruins of the life I had set on fire. Chris was gone. I had tried. I had texted. I had called. But he never responded. He wanted nothing to do with me. The moment he realized that I wasn't worth the destruction Ethan had unleashed on both of us, he ran. My family? Still refused to speak to me. My job? Still gone. Every single bridge I had burned beyond repair. And now, the only person who could have ever saved me, the one person who had ever truly loved me, had found someone else. And I had spent so much time convincing myself that I could have it all, that I could humiliate my husband, that I could sleep with his best friend, that I could throw away our marriage and still come out untouched, but I had been so wrong. Because now as I sat alone, staring at that picture, realizing that Ethan was never coming back, I finally understood. This is my life now. This is what I truly deserve. I let my selfishness and greed ruin the one good thing I had, and now I'll live the rest of my life in regret.